Today is February 6, 2021 at 11:09 hours. This is Detective Neil Martin with the Vancouver Police Department speaking today with Deputy Greg Agar in regards to a use of force incident occurring on February 4th, 2021. Currently present at the Clark County Sheriff's Office West Precinct. Seated in the room with me is Deputy Greg Agar, his counsel Tracy Anderson, Guild Representative Zach Nielsen, and with assisting me today with the interview is Detective Sergeant Scott Boyle with the Camas Police Department. I'll start the interview with informing everybody in this room that the conversation is being recorded. Deputy Agar, do you understand that this conversation is being recorded?
Yes, sir.
And do I have your permission to do so?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Nielsen?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Detective Sergeant Boyle? Thanks. Okay. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this recording, we're here today to talk about a incident that occurred on February 4th, 2021, while you were, I believe, to be working as a Clark County Sheriff's Office deputy.
Yes, sir.
Okay. On that date and time, do you remember what your call sign was?
1 Sam 75, sir.
Okay. And what work assignment were you performing that day?
West Swing A patrol, and the 75 beat isn't assigned a beat. We call it the floater car, sir.
Okay. So on that particular day, you didn't have a geographic area of responsibility per se?
Hazeldale typically, sir, but I'm, again, not assigned to a specific beat.
Okay. And on that day, were you in Sheriff's Office uniform?
Yes, sir.
And on that particular day, did you later have an opportunity to meet with detectives who photographed you?
Yes, sir.
And at the time those photographs were taken, is that an accurate representation of what you were wearing at the time of this incident?
Yes, sir.
The incident that I'm specifically referring to was a traffic stop that occurred, and I don't know who initiated the traffic stop, but a traffic stop that occurred in the area of Northeast 68 and Northeast 2nd.
Yes,
Does
sir.
that sound familiar to you?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. Can you tell me how you became aware of that traffic stop?
The traffic stop was performed on the way to a 911 call that I had been dispatched to, sir.
Okay. Do you know who initiated the traffic stop?
Deputy Boyle did, sir.
Okay. So Deputy Boyle initiated a traffic stop, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. It sounds like you were already responding to a different call?
Yes, sir. So myself, as along with other units, had been dispatched to a 911 call. It was some sort of traffic complaint at what was described as the drug house up the street. Deputy Boyle performed the traffic stop and stated that the traffic stop was related to the 911 call that we were responding to, sir.
Okay. So to be clear for me then, basically you and Deputy Boyle were responding to an unrelated or to a possibly related 911 call, and as a result of that call, Deputy Boyle stopped a vehicle that may have been associated with that underlying call?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What do you recall next in regards to the traffic stop? How did you become aware of the traffic stop? Did you hear Deputy Boyle over the radio?
Yes. So Deputy Boyle put out over the radio that he was going to be conducting a traffic stop with a vehicle that was related to the call. At the time, I was at City Harvest Church typing reports, which is at Northwest 9th and Northwest 78th Street. At the time, I didn't have my vest on. My radio was sitting on the desk. So when I was dispatched to the call, I put my radio on, put my vest on, put my radio in my vest, got in my patrol car and started to leave towards the call. At approximately when I was at Northwest 9th and Northwest 78th, Deputy Boyle sounded off with the traffic stop, and the traffic stop was just a few blocks away from the target location that the 911 call had suggested the problem was coming from. So I continued east on Northwest 78th Street, went south on Northeast Hazeldale Avenue, and turned onto Northeast 68th Street from Hazeldale Avenue, initially to check on Deputy Boyle, make sure that he had another unit with him, and then continue on to the call. When I arrived at Northeast 68th and 2nd Avenue, I noticed Deputy Boyle's patrol car. His lights were activated. like are typical for a traffic stop. His patrol car was on the left, Deputy Troop's patrol car was on the right, and I noticed that Deputy Troop was on the passenger side of the vehicle that had been stopped. As I came down Northeast 68th Street, the initial 911 call said that there was several vehicles revving their engines. There was a car circling the neighborhood, so I knew that there was potentially numerous vehicles involved. So for this reason, I pulled up behind Deputy Boyle's patrol car and noticed that he was walking back towards the driver's door. I rolled down my window and asked him, "Hey, are you good?" And his response was, "I don't know yet." And I asked him, "Do you want me to stay here or do you want me to go look for the other car?" And he told me to stay there. At that point, I backed my patrol car back up onto 68th out of the roadway as best as I could, and then exited my patrol car.
Okay.
Continuing on, when I exited my patrol car, I walked behind Deputy Troop and Deputy Boyle's patrol car to the driver's side of Deputy Boyle's patrol car. As I crested around the corner, so the driver's rear corner, I noticed that the driver's door of the suspect vehicle was open. Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop were in some sort of struggle with the driver. I couldn't tell from that vantage point exactly what was occurring. And I heard Deputy Boyle said, "You're going to get bit by my dog." And at that point, I knew that there was some sort of use of force going on, and I escalated my response and jogged to the driver's door of the suspect vehicle.
Okay, so let's back up real quick. So you're approaching Deputy Boyle's vehicle on the driver's side, and then can you tell me specifically what you remember hearing him saying, or what led you to believe that you needed to get up to his location a little bit quicker, I guess?
Like I said, I distinctly remember him saying, "You're going to be bitten by my dog," and I did notice that both of them were in the driver's door well, and some sort of struggle was ensuing, whether they were trying to get him out of the car. Or I can't speculate as to what that portion of it was.
Okay. What about their behavior led you to believe that there was some sort of struggle going on as far as the two deputies in the door?
They were. It appeared that they were trying to remove the driver from the vehicle. They were reaching into the car. It appeared that they were grabbing onto the suspect. So that's what led me to believe I needed to escalate my response.
Did it appear that the person in the car was cooperating with their orders?
No, sir.
And you're basing that based upon your observations and what you heard? Is that correct?
So that statement is based upon the observations that I observed as I ran up to the car, and then was between Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop, attempting to assist them with removing the suspect from the car.
And then what occurs as you approach the suspects or the vehicle that has been stopped?
So as I get to the suspect vehicle, again the driver's door is open. Deputy Boyle is in the driver's door well, if you will. The A pillar, I would describe it as. Deputy Troop is where the B pillar is, and I try to insert myself between them two. Again, there is a struggle. At this point, I can see that Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop have a hold of the suspect, and they're trying to physically remove him, and they are facing active resistance from the suspect. Obviously, the door wall of the vehicle is very small. Deputy Boyle, myself, and Deputy Troop, that's a lot of body size, if you will, trying to fit into a small space. So, again, I'm trying to insert myself between them two to grab on to the suspect to pull him out. At that point, it was very clear that the suspect was not going to comply with any commands that were being given to him. I very much so remember several commands from Deputy Boyle saying, "You need to get out of the car, you need to get out of the car." Deputy Boyle has a very commanding voice, and that very distinctively in my mind sticks with me. Once I myself had the opinion that the suspect was not going to cooperate and get out of the vehicle, I reached for my radio. I attempted to put out to dispatch that we were fighting with the suspect, and very distinctively remember the beep that came across in my ear. I wear an earpiece, and the beep means that somebody else may be talking on the radio. There's some sort of signal interference, etc. At about that time, I remember Deputy Troop saying we're fighting with the suspect. At that point, the suspect was still in the car. Deputy Boyle, with his body positioning, was in the car as well. It appeared that he had a hold of the suspect, was trying to pull him out. All of the attempts were, in my opinion, not working. So thinking of less lethal options, I transitioned from my radio, which is just a little microphone piece. I don't wear a big microphone. Down to my taser, thinking for a less lethal option that would subdue the suspect and make it easier for us to pull him out of the car. In transitioning to do that, I very distinctly remember the car turning on. Vehicle. The vehicle turned up, and I remember the suspect had Deputy Boyle's arm, and Deputy Boyle was in the car, still actively trying to remove the suspect from the car. At that point, the less lethal option of the taser, in my opinion, was no longer an option, because this had now transitioned into potentially a scenario where Deputy Boyle was going to be drugged by the vehicle with the suspect holding on to him. And I feared that him, as well as myself and Deputy Troop, were going to be placed in severe danger. Once I realized that the taser was no longer an option, and I hadn't even pulled out of my holster, I reached for my firearm and drew my firearm to use lethal force against the suspect to protect Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop, as well as myself's lives at that point. As I was doing so, I heard and saw 2 shots fired from Deputy Boyle's firearm. Thanks.
Okay, can you tell me what happened after you heard the 2 shots?
After I heard the 2 shots, again, I had pulled my firearm, so my firearm was out. The vehicle, if we backtrack slightly before the 2 shots, the vehicle did lurch forward, which led me to believe that the vehicle had been put into drive. And again, that would support the fact that I thought we were in danger and potentially going to be drugged by the vehicle. The 2 shots were fired, and at that point, all of us were able to take a step back away from the vehicle. The vehicle continued at a slight northwest motion across Northeast 2nd Avenue through a driveway, through a yard, continued through the yard across Northeast 69th Street into the front yard. And at that point, I was going through my head how to get the vehicle to stop, what actions we could take, because obviously I knew that the suspect had been hit and we needed to render first aid. I noticed when the vehicle went into the yard at Northeast 2nd and 69th Street, it went up onto a curb and in front of it was a fence. Deputy Boyle, myself, and Troop all walked in some sort of a line, if you will. I held lethal cover on the car until it reached the fence. Once the vehicle had stopped, I took a position to get an angle on the vehicle to ensure that the driver didn't have any weapons in his hands or anything like that. When I walked up, I could visibly see that the driver had been shot in the forehead. There was blood dripping from the wound. I looked back at Deputy Troop and Deputy Boyle. I told them we need to get the suspect out of the car and start rendering first aid. At that point, I holstered my firearm. I put a pair of mechanics gloves that I had in my pocket on, as I didn't have any nitrile gloves. And then I removed the suspect from the car. He was removed, laid down on his back, and I applied pressure to the gunshot wound.
Okay.
If we take a step back as well, immediately after the shots were fired, I do distinctly remember saying, "Shots fired, we need medical and a supervisor." So I knew that medical had been started, or at least I had asked for it. Once the suspect was out of the car on the ground, I again asked for medical. I had applied pressure to the gunshot wound. At that point, I think Deputy Kip had arrived, and I said we need to cut the suspect's clothes off and look for a secondary wound, because I knew 2 shots had been fired and only saw 1 entry wound. I didn't know if the other round had struck a different body part, if it had missed, etc. So we cut the suspect's clothes off. Deputy Kip was using a very small pair of trauma shears. I had a pair of trauma shears in my vest that were much larger. I took those out, and they have a green handle on them. I gave them to somebody to use. One of the Vancouver police officers had a bandage of some sort, which he gave to me, so I then removed my hand from the gunshot wound, which was just my hand at that point, put the bandage on, and then reapplied pressure. The suspect his chest was moving up and down. He was nonverbal at that point. His right hand was moving, and when I say moving, if you were to have a hand, an arm on the ground, he would almost be like reaching for something. At that point, the suspect he hadn't been searched yet. All of his clothes weren't cut off, so I did hold his hand down until we knew that there was no weapons or anything that he could reach for at that point, and continued applying pressure until fire got there. When fire got there, they started, doing vitals, etc. They had a larger bandage which they used to wrap the initial bandage that we had put on the suspect, basically around his head, to try and contain that for transport. AMR showed up shortly after. They said they needed to put him on a backboard, and my position was on the right-hand side of the suspect, between him and the vehicle. That's where they said they needed the backboard. So at that point, I stood up, walked away, and let AMR and fire continue first aid. I noticed that I had a severe amount of blood on my hands, my gloves, so I removed my gloves. I asked Sergeant Ellithorpe if he had anything to clean myself up with. He said he did, so we walked to his patrol car. At some point, Sergeant Ellithorpe went from his patrol car to the ambulance, and I was there with Sergeant Bieber. I asked Sergeant Bieber, hey, do you mind pulling up my sleeves so I can clean myself up? Sergeant Bieber put on a pair of gloves, rolled my sleeves up. I was able to wipe myself down. And then I was married up with Detective Nielsen, and we came up to West Precinct.
Okay. So let me go back a little bit. This is where we're going to start, kind of hopefully seeing if you remember additional details. You had, and some of this may be on me for not specifically asking in the beginning. Can you tell me what type of car Deputy Boyle had stopped?
It was a light-colored four-door Mercedes. And in the initial 911 call, it was reported that there was two vehicles revving their engines, both very similar in nature, description, and then a blue vehicle that was circling the neighborhood.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is because you mentioned the small space at the driver's side door, and so I was trying to determine if it was a passenger car or a truck or whatnot that had been stopped.
Yes, sir.
During this time, you hear verbal commands coming from Deputy Boyle. Did anybody else provide any verbal commands that you're aware of?
Not that I recall, sir.
From your perception, were Deputy Boyle's commands clear and concise to the person inside the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
You had mentioned at some point during this struggle that you observed that you had decided to transition to your taser, and I just want to be clear, at any point did you turn on or activate your taser?
No, sir. The reason for that is the timing, and the event happened so fast that my transition from radio thought process to taser to firearm was mere seconds, and I wasn't able to get the taser out.
So that was going to be, you segue into my next area. So you had talked about the taser, but by the time that you'd made the decision to deploy the taser, was it no longer a feasible force option?
Correct.
Based upon what you felt to be based upon your perception of what was occurring at the incident?
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned struggling, and you mentioned the word fighting over the police radio, and I want to be clear: did the person inside the vehicle actually physically fight, throw a punch, or otherwise attempt to assault an officer that you're aware of?
At one point during the struggle, the suspect was facing, if you're sitting in the driver's seat of a vehicle, to his left, so perpendicular to the seat. And from my vantage point and what I saw, it appeared that he was using his feet to kick or push Deputy Boyle away from him with both of his feet.
Okay. Do you know what general area his feet may have pushed or otherwise touched Deputy Boyle?
I would say right around the knee area, maybe slightly above is what it appeared to me. But it also appeared that part of the suspect's feet were also on the, what do you call it, the doorway, if you will. So, again, the suspect's feet were on the doorway pushing against Deputy Boyle's legs.
So at some point during this struggle, it sounds like, is it fair to characterize this as a rapidly evolving incident?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
At some point during this rapidly evolving incident, you specifically remember a vehicle being turned on.
Yes, sir.
Was that the vehicle that had been stopped by Deputy Boyle?
Yes, sir.
Do you specifically recall that the vehicle was not running prior to
I wouldn't specifically be able to say that I knew the vehicle wasn't running. I just very distinctively remember the vehicle being turned on, and the reason that I keep saying it's the suspect's vehicle is, to my knowledge, there was not another vehicle that was next to us parked that could have been turned on that would provide the same level of audio that I heard.
Okay. Did you recall hearing the vehicle being put into gear?
Not physically put into gear, no, sir.
Did you see, or are you otherwise aware of any other persons that were inside that vehicle, or was it just the driver?
Just the driver, sir.
Do you recall, and I know there's a lot going on for you during this time period, do you recall whether or not there were any other witnesses or persons present besides you, Deputy Boyle, Deputy Troop, or the person inside the vehicle?
No, sir, not that I know of.
You don't recall seeing any witnesses standing out in their yards or any other persons walking by?
Not that I know of, sir.
Any other police officers that you recall?
At the initial scene?
At the initial scene?
No, sir.
During the struggle?
No, sir.
Okay. You had mentioned reaching for your firearm. Did you actually draw your firearm?
Yes, sir.
And how did you deploy your firearm?
My intent was to use lethal force against the suspect. The reason that I did not use lethal force is in the time that it took for me to transition to my taser to my firearm. I believe that Deputy Boyle, just with his body positioning, being a left-handed shooter, had a quicker draw time essentially, and was able to get his firearm out quicker than I was.
Okay. Did you actually see Deputy Boyle fire the shots?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware if Deputy Troop fired any shots?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
And just to be clear from your statement, you did not fire any shots?
No, sir.
Was the deployment of deadly force by Deputy Boyle, in your mind, effective in stopping the threat?
Yes, sir.
To you and Deputy Troop
Yes, sir.
and Deputy Boyle?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall whether or not Deputy Boyle made any verbal commands or warnings about the use of force, except for the previously mentioned that he would utilize his dog?
No, sir. He made several other verbal commands. He told the suspect to get out of the car several times. Before the shots were fired, just after the vehicle started, he said something to the fact of, "You're going to be shot." I don't recall exact words what were said, but I do remember him saying, "You're going to be shot."
Did you ever hear Deputy Boyle indicate to the person in the vehicle that he was under arrest?
Not that I recall, sir.
Okay. But you do recall that him providing a warning about potentially being shot?
Yes, sir.
And that was prior to Deputy Boyle's deploying lethal force?
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that after Deputy Boyle fires these 2 rounds, I guess I'm trying to be a little more clear in regards to the vehicle rolls forward.
Yes, sir.
So I will say for me, the assumption would be that the vehicle was in some sort of gear and that it rolled forward. As the vehicle rolls forward, what are the actions of you and Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop?
So the vehicle actually lurched forward as the shots were fired. After the shots were fired, I could tell that the vehicle was in a drive, just based upon the vehicle slowly rolling, a couple miles an hour, if you will. But a vehicle, when it's in drive, if the foot is off the brake, just continues to roll until it either somebody pushes the brake or it hits something.
Okay, so there was no indication necessarily at that particular point that the person was trying to flee the scene, as far as gas being someone putting gas or someone putting their foot on the gas maybe and trying to actually make the vehicle leave the scene?
After the shots were fired, no, sir.
Okay. And then you mentioned that the vehicle, as it's rolling, what are you and Deputy Troop and Deputy Boyle doing?
So as the vehicle rolls forward, shortly before and as the shots are fired, again, Deputy Boyle's body positioning is still in the vehicle. It appears that the suspect does have a grasp on him, which again would lead me to believe that Deputy Boyle was going to be dragged. Again, that's why I transitioned to my firearm. From shortly before the shots were fired until after I lost visual of Deputy Troop, my sole focus was on the suspect, and the thought process going through my mind is I need to use lethal force to protect Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop and myself. That was my thought process. My visual was solely on the suspect, looking for the proper angle to ensure that if I was to use lethal force, which was what my intent was, that I had a good angle, I had a good, somewhat of a backstop, and make sure that I wasn't going to hit one of my partners involved.
Okay. And then as the vehicle continues to roll across to its final resting place where it strikes a fence next to a residence, it sounds like, it's my understanding from your initial statement that, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you tactically approached the vehicle.
Yes, sir. As best as we could. At that point, like I said, I knew the suspect had been struck. Going through my mind, the vehicle appeared to just be in drive. It didn't appear to be turning down a street, if you will, or accelerating. So I, suspected that the suspect had some sort of wound that prevented him from doing that. So my primary concern was to get to the suspect and provide first aid. So we did perform somewhat of a tactical approach in a line, but we didn't use a patrol car for cover. We didn't do anything like that. We walked at a quick rate from the traffic stop location to the vehicle's final resting point.
And approximately how far is that?
300-400 feet.
Okay. And so once the scene was rendered safe, or once you felt that the scene was rendered safe enough, you and or other law enforcement, first responders administered aid?
Yes, sir.
And immediately called for aid?
Yes, sir. The call for aid was, I know for a fact that directly after the shots were fired, I put out, shots fired, we need medical and a supervisor. So I knew that medical had been called right away. And then again, after he had been removed from the vehicle, I again believe that I called for medical as well.
Okay. You had asked or mentioned earlier that you were looking to see if the subject had any weapons in his hands. Did you see any weapons in his hands?
I did not see any weapons in his hand at the time, no, sir.
And you had mentioned that based upon your belief of hearing two shots that you had removed the person's clothing. I'm going to assume that was for the purpose of trying to locate any other secondary wounds?
Yes, sir. Like I said, I did visibly see the one in his forehead. I very distinctively heard two shots, so I wanted to ensure the other one had not struck a different body part.
Okay. At any point was the person handcuffed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When did we handcuff him?
Once his clothes had been cut off and he was searched and known to not have weapons, we put a pair of handcuffs on the front to make medical purposes easier for the medical staff that was on scene.
Okay. And do you recall specifically what fire did, as far as did they scoop him and go, or do you not have any knowledge of that?
As soon as AMR got on scene, it was a very quick process to get him on the backboard and leave. Fire was there for what seemed like a few minutes prior to AMR getting there. So again, they assisted with making the bandage that I had put on tighter and better, obviously, because they have more medical supplies than we do.
And then you had mentioned the Vancouver Police Department arrived on scene?
There was a Vancouver police officer that showed up and gave me a bandage to put on the suspect. Yes, sir.
Do you know the officer's name?
I don't.
Would you be able to identify him if you saw him again?
He was in a mask, and again, my focus was on the suspect, so probably not.
Okay. Can you recall when approximately the Vancouver police officer showed up in relation to after the incident? And this is probably a guess on your part because I know there's a lot going on, but I'm trying to determine at what point the Vancouver police officer may have arrived on scene. So was it in the middle of patient care? Was it at the onset of patient care? Had fire already arrived as well?
It was before fire arrived, but it was definitely after patient care had started, at least to my knowledge, because I removed him from the vehicle, applied pressure, we started cutting his clothes off. I saw him walk around. The suspect's feet were towards the front of the vehicle. I saw him walk around the suspect's feet, and he was directly in front of me and said, "I have a bandage if you need one."
I want to focus a little bit more on one of your previous statements. So you had said that you were concerned about being drugged by the vehicle in the severe danger, that you felt that was your term, severe danger. Can you define a little bit better for me what severe danger means to you?
My fear was that, based on positioning as the vehicle lurched forward, that Deputy Troop and myself could potentially be run over by the rear tires of the vehicle had the suspect turned slightly to go onto the roadway. And my fear was that Deputy Boyle was going to be drugged by the car and again run over by the rear tires, pulled under the vehicle. So severe danger, in my own words, is a threat to our lives. You know, I've responded to several scenes where people have been run over by vehicles, whether it be life-threatening or not. It's definitely life-changing. You know, broken bones, etc. They can affect someone's life, you know, forever. And definitely be run over by a vehicle is extremely dangerous and life-threatening.
So, having said that, do you believe that you or Deputy Troop or Deputy Boyle were in danger of receiving great bodily harm?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that the force used by Deputy Boyle was reasonable and necessary to prevent injury to you?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that it was necessary and reasonable to prevent death or serious physical harm to Deputy Troop?
Yes, sir.
And do you believe the force used by Deputy Boyle was reasonable and necessary to prevent death or serious physical harm or great bodily injury to Deputy Boyle?
Yes, sir.
So I did this a little bit out of order, so I apologize. Normally at the very beginning of the interview, I would ask you about your training and experience, and we kind of jumped right into it. So do you mind telling me a little bit about how long you've been employed as a law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir. So I was hired by the Clark County Sheriff's Office in 2015. So I've been on the road outside of Academy for just under 6 years.
Okay. So did you attend the police academy in Washington State through CJTC?
Yes, sir. Up in Burien.
Okay. Any prior law enforcement experience?
No, sir.
So the sheriff's office is your first law enforcement employer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you attended the academy, do you specifically recall receiving training in regards to de-escalation tactics or de-escalation principles?
They touched on it, yes, sir. They had just enacted the Blue Courage program, I believe it is, and that's what we were trained on.
Okay. And is the Blue Courage program in line with the mindset, more of the guardian over the warrior?
Yes, sir.
Type mindset?
Yes, sir.
Have you held any specialty positions with the sheriff's office?
I'm a EVOC instructor, an FTO. I'm a UAS operator, so I hold a lot of collateral duties. But as far as specialty assignments via detectives or anything, I have not. No.
Okay. So your primary assignment has been patrol?
Yes, sir.
During that period. And just for clarification on the recording, what does FTO stand for?
Field training officer, sir.
And what do you do as a field training officer?
So recruits that come out of the academy, their field training is a 3.5 month long program. And FTO's job is to train them, teach them policies, procedures, ensure that they are the recruits are safe and able to do the job on their own at the end of the FTO process. Mentoring, schooling, counseling, etc.
So a teacher-mentor type relationship?
Yes, sir.
And usually FTOs are selected based upon their knowledge of use of force policies, departmental policies, things like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. EVOC, what does that stand for?
Emergency vehicle operations, teaching people how to drive in scenarios, running code responses to calls, dealing with traffic, physically how the car handles, etc.
Okay, and then UAS operator is a what?
It's a unmanned aerial vehicle, drone, if you will. The drone that I specifically has a camera on it that has FLIR, which is used for nighttime looking for suspects. Can be used for evidentiary purposes, etc.
Okay. Have you been involved in any other critical incident like this?
I've responded to them, but not directly involved as this, no, sir.
Okay. You have any questions, Sergeant Boyle?
Yeah, I just have some follow-up stuff here, more just to get some detail.
Yes, sir.
On the recording. So, you talked about the initial 911 call, and you remembered that there was a complaint about revving engines. Was there specific vehicles involved? I know you said something about a blue car.
So what I remember, sir, is the report was that there was 2 cars revving their engines, and there was a report of a blue car circling the neighborhood, sir.
Was the Mercedes specifically mentioned in the call?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Had you had any history at that specific location?
So the 911 call came in and said they gave the address off of Jordan Way, and it specifically said the drug house up the street. That area in particular, that house in particular, is well known by patrol deputies. I can recite the address for you specifically. I've responded to numerous calls there. There's always, or in the past, there's been numerous drug-related arrests, warrant-related arrests. It's a place that you don't go to, by yourself. You always take somebody with you, just for officer safety purposes.
So you had been at that house numerous times. Did you have any recollection of this Mercedes? Have you ever stopped it before or seen the car before?
I have not seen that car there.
What about the driver? Did you recognize him or had any contact with him?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
Can you describe the driver? Do you recall what he looked like?
Initially, I thought he was a Hispanic male with dark hair. He did have some facial hair, very skinny, 5'7", 5'8", roughly, wearing dark clothing.
Okay. Do you know the person by the name of Jenoah Donald?
Not after, or not prior to this incident, no, sir. I don't.
Okay, but you're familiar with the name now?
Yes, sir.
So we're going to fast forward now. You mentioned when you showed up that Deputy Boyle's patrol car had the lights on, indicative of a traffic stop.
Yes, sir.
Was it a fully marked patrol car?
Yes, sir.
And he was wearing a police uniform?
Yes, sir.
Did you turn your lights on?
I turned my rear lights on Northeast 68th Street, and I believe I turned on my directional indicator to indicate vehicles to go around my patrol car.
Okay. And you were in uniform? I know we took pictures of you, but you were in full uniform?
Yes, sir.
And Deputy Troop, do you remember if her lights were on?
I don't recall, sir.
Okay. Was she in full uniform?
Yes, sir.
Is there any question in your mind that the driver of the Mercedes had any question that you guys were law enforcement officers?
No, sir.
Okay. You mentioned the struggle at the door, the driver's door of the Mercedes. Was the door open?
Yes, sir.
And all three of you were on that side?
We were all on the driver's side in the driver's side door.
Did anybody at any point ever go to the passenger side?
At the only time I saw somebody on the passenger side was initially when I showed up. Deputy Troop was on the passenger side, but she had transitioned to the driver's side. And when the struggle ensued, all of us stayed on the driver's side, sir.
Okay. Were you able to see from your vantage point if the driver of the Mercedes had his seatbelt on or not?
No, sir. And, well, I would have been able to see it, but I don't recall whether it was buckled or not. Yeah, I don't recall. I don't want
Okay.
to speculate.
Okay. You said that at the point the vehicle lurched forward, that Deputy Boyle was, I think you said inside the car and the suspect had a grasp on his arm. Can you give a little bit more detail about that? How far was he inside the car? Could you see the driver, how he was grasping Deputy Boyle? Can you give some more detail about that?
Yeah, so from what I recall, sir, Deputy Boyle's head was inside the car. He was actively trying to pull the suspect out. I distinctly remember the suspect getting away from Deputy Boyle's grasp and reaching towards the steering wheel, I would assume, to turn the car on, because that's about the time the car turned on. And at that point, Deputy Boyle's head was still in the car, his upper torso appeared to be in the car, and the suspect had a grasp on his right arm, I believe, sir.
Okay. And you said that Deputy Boyle's a left-handed shooter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then the incident happens, the vehicle continues going forward, and you guys go up tactically, and you're removing the driver from the car.
Yes, sir.
Did anybody put the car in park or turn the engine off at that point?
I do remember somebody specifically saying we need to put the car in park. I don't remember specifically who did it or when that happened.
Okay.
But I do know it was after we started rendering first aid.
Did you get a good enough look at the car at the time to notice if it's an automatic or a stick shift?
I did not, no, sir.
How much time do you think elapsed from the time that the shots were fired till you guys were able to remove him and start rendering aid?
Including the time to walk to the car, 15 to 20 seconds maybe.
Okay. And do you have an estimation on how long it took for fire to arrive?
It felt like forever. I would say a couple of minutes, but I can't be sure.
Were you injured at all in the incident?
The only injury that I have is some ringing in my ears from the gunshots, I would presume. But
okay. Did you notice if Deputy Boyle or Deputy Troop were injured?
At the time, no, sir, I didn't.
And you said that you felt that the force used by Deputy Boyle was reasonable and necessary. Were there any other force options available at that point?
At that point, not that I believe so, sir. Again, the thought went through my head, and I actually reached for my taser initially. But once the vehicle turned on, what went through my mind is the suspect was trying to drive away. And at that point, my fear was that one, if not all of us, were going to be injured by the car, potentially being run over or drugged.
So less lethal is not an option at that point?
No, sir.
Okay. I think that's all my notes.
We're almost done, but I do have a couple clarifying questions.
Yes,
Sorry.
sir.
So since Sergeant Boyle mentioned the seatbelt, and you mentioned pulling him out of the vehicle, did you have to take a seatbelt off of him when you pulled him out of the car?
No, sir. Again, that fact and the fact of his body positioning being rotated towards the outside of the car would lead me to believe that his seatbelt was not on. But again, I don't want to speculate because I just don't remember.
Which is why I just asked if it was on when you took him out.
Yes, sir.
The distance between Deputy Boyle and the subject at the time that the force was deployed, about how far would you presume that to be? Arm length? Sounds
Yeah,
like?
absolutely.
I
Yes,
just
sir.
want to clarify.
Yes, sir.
Have you had any conversation with Deputy Boyle or Deputy Troop since this incident occurred?
One text message to ask if they were okay, how they were doing. But as far as the details of the incident, I haven't spoken to them at all.
Okay. And when did that text message take place? The night of the incident?
The next morning, yes, sir.
Okay. Any other conversation or text messages with them?
No, sir.
You have a personal relationship with either of those two outside of the workplace, or is it primarily just a professional?
Professional. I am very good friends with Deputy Boyle and Deputy Troop. You know, she's relatively new. I've never hung out with her outside of work, so I would consider that more of a professional relationship.
Okay. But you have on occasion hung out with Deputy Boyle outside of work?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope, that's all I got.
I don't have anything else. We can take a break, and then if there's anything you want to add or clarify. So it is just after 12 o'clock, and I'll pause the tape. It's February 6, 2021 at 12:12 hours. After a short break, the parties have reconvened in the room with the sheriff's office. During the break, Ms. Anderson met with Deputy Agar while the rest of us excused ourselves from the room. There was no conversation between ourselves and Ms. Anderson or her client during that time period. It's my understanding that Deputy Agar, you have a few things that you'd like to add.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So the first thing you asked about prior law enforcement experience. I don't have any prior law enforcement experience, but I did enlist in the military in 2009, and I did do some active duty and National Guard time, which kind of set me up for the law enforcement career. Gave me a sense of responsibility, a sense of order, a sense of understanding chain of command, respect, etc. I want to kind of emphasize the space in the driver's door well of the incident. Again, Deputy Boyle, myself, and Deputy Troop were all in that door well space. Obviously, I'm a bigger guy. Deputy Boyle is a very muscular person, very fit, but he's also a larger stature. And then you have Deputy Troop of smaller stature. The space was so confined that the reason that I was not able to get between them is because there was no space. Deputy Boyle was, in the driver's door well. Deputy Troop was to the right-hand side of me, and when she was actively trying to remove the suspect from the car, she was, against the B pillar. Part of her body was against the B pillar while she was reaching in, and again, there was no space for me to get between them. And then as far as I wanted to talk about kind of the de-escalation, the blue courage thing. Part of the de-escalation thing is using words, being verbal with suspects, trying to talk to them and de-escalate things. I just wanted to emphasize that numerous commands were given to the suspect to get out of the car. Numerous use of force warnings were given to him, and he had no compliance whatsoever. And it did not appear that he was going to be compliant with any verbal commands that were given.
Okay, and based upon that, is it your understanding through your training that you can use that force necessary or reasonable to take him out of the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
Since he's not being compliant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was there anything else?
I think that's it, sir.
Anything else, Sergeant Boyle?
Nothing from me.
Okay, so looks like it is 12:15 hours, and we will go ahead and conclude this interview with Deputy Agar.